Coming up on the GRIMM Exchange.
Is there a correlation between a love for horror and our well-being? Joining us is researcher Coltan Scrivner to talk to us about what his study says about our resilience during the pandemic.
And we're running with the wolves tonight as guest reviewer Luke Greensmith talks about the 2020 film Hunted.
And we talk about the lengths people go to be cool with the team behind the short film We Summoned a Demon. This and more on today's episode of The GRIMM Exchange. Hey horror fans, I'm Mariam.
And I'm Marcus, and welcome to the GRIMM Exchange, your one-stop shop for all your horror entertainment news needs.
To stay up to date with all our content, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell. What is going on in the world of horror? Time to check out our latest horror headlines.
Michael Myers returns this Halloween in Halloween Kills. The highly anticipated film was due out last Halloween, but was held back due to the pandemic, but fans are excited for his return this year. Even John Carpenter, co-creator of the original Halloween films, has nothing but praise for the latest installment. In a quote, he says it's the ultimate slasher film. I mean, there's nothing more than this one. Wow, man. Last week, actor Jeanette Mouse tragically passed away after a battle with cancer. Jeanette's latest work was being involved in Resident Evil Village as multiple characters, but most notably the scary witches we've seen in the trailers. Capcom released a statement saying, "We here at Capcom are deeply saddened to hear about the passing of Jeanette Mouse, the talented actress who helped bring several different characters, including our witches, to the world in Resident Evil Village. Our hearts go out to her family and loved ones." New gothic horror series, The Nethers, has just dropped its first trailer. The series by Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Avengers Joss Whedon is set in Victorian England. It sees Douglas Petrie and Jane Epsonson on the writing team as well. You might recognise their names from Buffy too. The Nethers follows the Touched, a group of people who mysteriously developed superpowers, fighting to protect people like them. It seems like there's plenty of danger, with the sinister villains believing the Touched are actually evil. The show will debut on HBO in April with 6 episodes and will stream on HBO Max. When fictional horror meets real-life tragedy, it really adds an extra level of creepy. In the US, there's an Amber Alert system, which is used for notifying the public of missing children. Just before the end of 2020, it appears that citizens of Texas received an unusual message from their state's alert system showing a suspected abductor and an abducted child. What made this alert so unusual is the fact that the abductor was shown as child plays Chucky and the abducted child was his son Glenn. The alert described the two in detail with accurate height, weight, physical appearance, and clothing colour and style included. The message was apparently received 3 times that day and caused by a test malfunction. We recently learned that Season 10 of The Walking Dead isn't finished. There are 6 additional episodes on the way later this year. With these episodes, we're said to be meeting Negan's wife Lucille for the very first time, and she'll be played by Hilary Burton Morgan, who's actually the real-life wife of Negan's performer Jeffrey Dean Morgan. She'll feature in an episode titled Here's Negan, which will be the actual final episode of Season 10, and images have been released for that episode. It's said to feature flashback elements to the distant past, taking inspiration from Robert Kirkman's Here's Negan comic books. With the images, there's an episode synopsis too, which reads, "Carol takes Negan on a journey, hoping to minimise the increasing tension. Negan reflects on the events that led him to this point and comes to a conclusion about his future." We've waited some time, but it appears that a true Cloverfield sequel is now in the works and Joe Barton is set to write the script. A report from The Hollywood Reporter states that, unlike the original, the next installment won't be a found footage film, and producer J.J. Abrams is set to return with hopes of recreating the magic that the original film captured. Next year, we get to see Jared Leto bring Marvel's vampiric Morbius to life. Until then, though, we can still marvel, see what I did there, in his awesomeness with a brilliant action figure from Mezco. For those unfamiliar, Dr. Michael Morbius messes up big time when attempting an experimental treatment involving vampire bat DNA and electroshock therapy to cure his rare blood disease. The treatment results in him developing superhuman powers, enhanced agility, speed and strength, and an insatiable lust for human blood. The figure itself is a brilliant one, and it is, it's got 30 different points of articulation, 3 different head portraits, hand-painted authentic detailing, and is approximately 17 centimeters tall and has 8 interchangeable hands, which gives you lots of different options if that's what you're into. And with that, those are your horror headlines. The horror genre is full of some macabre and grisly themes, from the undead to cults, from serial killers to ghosts. It's no wonder the stigma around the colourful genre is so hard to shake. But what if horror could actually be healthy? What sources are out there to suggest a correlation between the horror genre and our well-being? Researcher and PhD candidate in the Department of Comparative Human Development at the University of Chicago, Coltan Scrivner, is one of the experts tackling our more morbid interests and the effect they have on us.
Emotion, agitation or disturbance of mind, vehement or excited mental state. It is also a powerful and irrational master. Many of us enjoy a good fright at the sight of graphic imagery and shocking situations. But why would you choose such lunacy as entertainment? Are there any benefits to doing this to yourself? Could it even improve your well-being? Technically, you could include horror movies as part of your workout routine. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is said to burn the equivalent amount of calories to a large chocolate bar.
Here's Johnny!
According to an experiment undertaken at the University of Westminster in 2012, Jaws and The Exorcist similarly function as slimming agents. However, you'd have to replace the popcorn with carrot sticks to actually benefit from this side effect. Why not skip your next cardio session and watch Scott Derrickson's Sinister instead? The price comparison platform Broadband Choices hooked their test subjects to a heart rate monitor to measure the fear factor of 50 Halloween classics. The strongest jump scare had viewers' heartbeat twice as fast than the average resting state. Now, you might take those thrills for granted, but have you ever wondered what makes horror movies such terrific emotion machines? In the growing discipline of neurocinematics, the study of viewer engagement, scientists aim to find the formula of fear. Technologies like eye tracking and magnetic resonance imaging are used to investigate how movies orchestrate the responses of different brain regions. In January 2020, Finnish researchers published their most recent findings on neural activity in response to watching horror movies. To unveil the brain activity behind fear, they established a list of the 100 top-rated horror movies of the past century with the help of online databases. Then, an independent sample of participants rated them on scariness. In the end, 2 feature horror movies directed by James Wan proved to be just scary enough. Both Insidious and The Conjuring Part 2 were selected as fitting anxiogenics. The subsequent experiment revealed 2 distinct kinds of fear. One is your acute jolt from a jump scare, evidence of our instinctive reflexes. The other is more subtle, foreboding dread. It is the result of subconscious reasoning, thus much harder to determine. During those times when anxiety is slowly creeping up your spine, the brain activates the regions involved in visual and auditory perception. Therefore, we focus all our attention on cues of threat in the environment. After a sudden shock, our brain switches its main activity to emotion processing and threat evaluation. In the MRI, all regions needed for rapid decision-making are fired up. We are in fight or flight mode. However, our brain will keep these two modes in a constant feedback loop so that the sensory regions prepare the response networks for an upcoming threat. Even if we're just watching a movie, the brain is continuously anticipating and preparing us to take action. In the end, we get very jumpy and intensely immersed in the fictional realm. Horror movies and games play expertly with our brain patterns to plunge us into the abyss of our fears. As an afterglow effect, your ability to experience emotions is increased. Feelings of psychological excitation linger, keeping your mind in a state of arousal.
Jack, come back, please. No! This! He left me! He left me! No!
After a horror movie marathon, you may retain fonder memories of time spent with friends than you would have if you had seen another genre. To feel closer to your besties, keep this in mind when you plan your next remote watch party. Since all subsequent experiences are more deeply felt, a good horror movie provides the perfect backdrop for dating. Those who shudder together stay together. Scientists call this excitation transfer process. But even to the single viewer, horror offers a safe haven of emotional comfort. Did today's news trigger the maddening sense of lack of control in your life? Watch a horror movie that also channels a bit of your aggression. That way, you can project and dissipate some of that anger while steering clear of public endangerment. Using horror media as a playground to practice your emotion regulation skills gives you a real advantage in everyday life. A recent study published by researcher Coltan Scrivner looks at a correlation between our taste in film and our resilience during the ongoing pandemic.
So for this study on horror movies and pandemic resilience, it kind of started with this idea that maybe if people expose themselves to scary situations that are fictional, they can practice emotion regulation skills, sort of practice being afraid or feeling anxious and getting over that. So horror fans obviously are a really great example of a group that does this pretty often. And so basically what we did is we surveyed people about different media they use. So do they like horror movies or comedies or romance or maybe even some subgenres like zombie films or apocalyptic films. And then we gave them some surveys that assessed their psychological resilience with regard to the pandemic. So we asked them questions like, were you feeling more anxious than normal during the pandemic? Were you losing sleep or feeling irritable or feeling depressed? Were you able to find things to do that you enjoyed? And what we found was that people who had watched a lot of horror media prior to the pandemic, so people who were kind of these lifelong horror fans, actually had fewer symptoms of psychological distress during the pandemic. So they didn't report as much anxiety or depression or sleeplessness.
People who like to watch horror regularly also report a high sense of self-efficacy. Fans of alien invasion movies, apocalyptic scenarios, or zombie flicks feel especially confident in their ability to prepare and adapt.
People who watched certain subgenres had other kinds of resilience towards the pandemic. So for example, people who watched a lot of zombie movies or apocalyptic movies reported feeling more prepared for the pandemic. So they would say things like they knew what to buy in preparation when the pandemic was announced. Kind of the social consequences didn't really take them by surprise quite as much as people who didn't watch as many of these movies. And then one final thing we found was that people who scored high in something called Morbid Curiosity, so this is a personality trait that I've been researching and trying to describe, but basically it's an interest in threatening scenarios. And so this kind of taps into things like horror and true crime and body disgust, supernatural phenomena, things like that. People who are scored high in this trait also were more psychologically resilient during the pandemic. So in particular, they had a lot of positive resilience. So this would be things like finding ways to enjoy your life during the pandemic or finding something interesting about the pandemic. Even if you recognize that it's a serious event, you kind of find it intriguing, possibly because it resembles some of the other things that you enjoy during fiction.
Thus, horror fans appear to be significantly less likely to suffer from psychological distress during the COVID-19 crisis. So, if you're one of the millions of people out there managing day-to-day life with anxiety disorder, horror movies may in fact already be part of your coping strategy. Watching horror temporarily puts a face on any nagging sense of mental discomfort, one we can punch.
And now, it's time to dive into our wild card of a segment. The Grimm Zone! I'm going to make it more elaborate each time.
Today's Grimm Zone is sponsored by Fire and Brimstone. Fire and Brimstone offers curious and wonderful witchy goodies. Want some light in your life? Check out their range of 100% soy candles that contain either a moon-charged healing crystal or a witchy pin badge. Watch the wax melt and your goth heart flutter as you get to choose skulls or bats. Want to flaunt your witchiness? Fire and Brimstone also offers a wide range of jewelry, from crystal rings to resin necklaces. When the world is going to hell, it's time to treat your witchy self with Fire and Brimstone. So if you go to their website and spend a minimum of £20, you will get 10% off. Just go to this website, type in this promo code, and get witchin'.
Today's Grimm Zone is somewhat of a how-to guide for green horror film viewers. With that in mind, let's take a look at some basic rules on responsible horror viewing.
Now, we all know that pleasure can become pain when taken a little too far. With regard to horror entertainment, is there even a right way to mess with your mind? This is a public service announcement brought to you by the GRIMM EXCHANGE. Today's lifestyle of working long hours in front of a bright screen with little exercise and lacking sleep patterns makes it even more important to be mindful of your need for relaxation. Bear in mind that a good horror movie will put your body in a prolonged state of arousal. When you get scared, your stress hormone levels spike. Additionally, staring at screens for hours in a dark room makes it more difficult to fall asleep. Better keep that circadian rhythm intact. Rule number 1. Prioritize sleep. Now that we've set the basic condition, what's the right way to choose a horror movie? Your way, of course. Self-regulation is the ability to understand and manage your behavior, especially your emotional reactions. It helps you calm down after upsetting events and increases your focus during important tasks. So feel free to shop around the vast and diverse section of horror movies to develop your unique taste. When you're suffering from an anxiety disorder, your overall sensitivity to the bodily sensations of fear may be increased. If you worry about intrusive thoughts or nightmares, skip horror night and opt for something that fits your current mood. During pregnancy, you might avoid subjecting your tiny tenant to a rude awakening from their slumber. Rule number 2, customize your scare. That said, do you have a horror buddy? Movie night is the perfect opportunity to practice co-regulation. It's an interpersonal instinct during which one nervous system calms the other, producing a feedback loop that is soothing for both. For all you couples out there, it's cuddle time. Though lessened, the process of co-regulation also works remotely, for example, during a watch party with your besties. Rule number 3, buddy up. Now that you've decided to team up with fellow horror connoisseurs, the next step is to compromise on the title. Especially for young horror fans, it's important to resist peer pressure. Don't ever subject yourself to discomfort because others want to watch something you find upsetting. And if you suddenly realize that a certain scene is too much for you to stomach in that moment, reject that mean little inner voice belittling you for being scared. Rule number 4, no fear shaming. Checking movie posters, teasers, trailers, or reviews helps find a good fit for the whole group. Here at the GRIMM EXCHANGE, we're usually used to cautioning against them, but when it comes to responsible horror watching, we advocate rule number 5, respect necessary spoilers. And finally, you're the one who knows yourself best. What horror movies do you want to watch? What are you willing to watch for the sake of company? and what won't entertain you. For certain professional groups, such as firefighters, medical staff, soldiers, and everyone else coping with their fair share of atrocious real-life experiences, trigger management is essential. Generally, the nature of trauma being stored in body memory involves the risk of inadvertently dredging up repressed traumatic memories with scary movies. To a lesser extent, you may find that personal lifestyle changes, like founding a family, changes your preferences as well. Parenthood naturally increases empathy, so you'll be especially sensitive when confronted with content that exploits vulnerability as a plot device. Speaking of children, the little ones haven't developed their ability to self-regulate yet, and rely heavily on co-regulation with a competent adult. Parental guidance is indeed advised. Rule number 6, set boundaries. And those are our rules of responsible horror watching. If you feel we're missing something, share it with us. If you've had a bad experience watching a film and now wish you had known better then, we're all ears. But most importantly, share these rules and your stories so it doesn't happen again.
Next, we would like to welcome Luke Greensmith to the show. Whilst he's usually dissecting folklore on his podcast, Luke Law, today he'll be reviewing the 2020 wolf-themed horror thriller Hunted.
Hunted is a Shudder exclusive that released on Thursday the 14th of January that I think is a strong pick for a Women in Horror Month movie night. Not only because so many people have not had a chance to see it yet, but the content here is perfect. A modern-day retelling of Red Riding Hood with a strong female lead that will have taken you to some strange places by the time the credits roll. The fairy tale aspect in here is in very broad strokes, rather than being a directly recognisable one-to-one conversion. Use of colour, a red hoodie being pretty obvious. There's a nominal link to stories as a meta-commentary, as well as a bit of tension between the wild and civilization. But the heavy lifting of Red Riding Hood here is the Don't Talk to Strangers core parable, along with the predation of the protagonist by an unnerving threat. The antagonists really drive the action hard, especially when it comes to building up dread. This isn't a film for jump scares, being very much built around rising tension. There's a standout wild performance by R.A. Werfalter here. Mercurial, menacing, at times weirdly compelling and charismatic, other times just plain disturbing. Without any suspension of disbelief being broken to drop-heavy signifiers, he's still clearly our villainous big bad wolf of the tale. Writing, direction and performance all line up with that intent. This character is clearly hungry and cunning enough to hide their true nature to get close to people. Right up to the end, as you see more facets of this character, they make a brilliant grounded evil for the woman he is pursuing. Speaking of which, leading lady Lucy DeBay is incredible at selling being afraid. Plenty of range on top of that besides, but this is an underrated skill. Something vital for building empathy to get some scares out of the horror, and she absolutely nails it. A small cast-sustained menace movie can't just chuck the occasional scream at the screen. You need subtlety and a deep range to keep varying how you're portraying the experience, so the audience can't get used to, and therefore numb to, what's happening to these characters. And Lucy DeBay really is great here. If there was nothing else to recommend, she would still be worth your time alone. There's definitely more going on here though. Hunted is a film that deals with the topic of sexual violence and how women are preyed upon in society. Pretty close to some readings of the original fairy tale to be fair, but there's no fetishization of the topic here. It knows when to not show something, keeping the threat but not obsessing over or glamorizing the violence, getting its point across without veering into crass exploitation. Not that this can't be done by men writing this type of movie, but there was a team writing this one, and as well as director Vincent Perronard, co-writer Leigh Pernole worked on Hunted. It probably helped to get a woman's perspective into a story like this. As much as I believe nothing should be off limits to storytelling, there are definitely difficult subject matters to tackle, this type of violence definitely being one of them, and the two writers worked together doing a great job of crafting a compelling exploration of the topic in this one. It's well written, well acted, and shot down pretty, but I can see where the mixed reviews online are coming from. It's very narrow in scope and can be a little fragmented at times, occasionally veering into the downright weird. Arguably starting downright weird, risking losing viewers early. Yet while I can understand these reviews, I don't agree with them. I thought this was an interesting blend of archetypal storytelling and solid character study. Maybe save it for another time if you're out for a large-scale action, but if you want something a little different and a lot tense, Hunted is well worth your time. It's a solid 7 out of 10 movie. Small in scale, but really well done. It doesn't always succeed when it tries something, but it's always happy to at least try something different. Certainly has some surprises in store for those who stick with it. Oh, and I would like to apologise to the nations of France and Belgium. I almost certainly butcher pronunciations of names here. That's kind of an ongoing thing with me.
If you're interested in learning more about traditional folklore, check out Luke's podcast, Luke Lore, on popular podcast apps such as Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict, and YouTube.
Also, it so happens that I was recently a guest on Luke Lore, so if you want to hear me speak about witch folklore, go to Luke Lore's podcast and listen to episode 23, Which Witch is Which? It goes without saying that we here at Grimfest TV absolutely love horror films, and when we do get a chance, we also try to meet the makers behind these works of art and introduce them to you. So without further ado, follow me to our Grimfest basement and let's see what's in store for us today. Ah yes, the Grimfest basement. What have we here? Interesting. We summoned a demon. Writer and director of We Summoned a Demon, Chris McInroy. Welcome.
Hey Mary, I'm happy to be here.
Actor from We Summoned a Demon, Carlos Larotta. Welcome.
Hi Miriam. Hello from Austin, Texas.
And also actor from We Summoned a Demon, Kirk Johnson. It's good to see ya.
Hi, Miriam. More like We Summoned a Kirk, am I right?
Chris, tell us a little bit about your film.
So We Summon a Demon is about two guys who are trying to do a summoning spell to make one of them cool to get a date with Brenda. The spell goes horribly wrong. A demon comes out. They're trapped in this warehouse. They need to figure out how to defeat this demon and get out of the warehouse and stay alive.
And what would you guys say gives the film its unique character? You know, that je ne sais quoi.
I think what gives the film its unique character are the two characters of Kirk and Carlos. I know they have a lot of chemistry.
We did improv together for many years, and so that came very naturally, and that was really fun to just basically hang out with Kirk and Chris and have fun doing it.
I guess I have to say, because Carlos said this about me, although I probably wouldn't otherwise, is working with Carlos or whatever. He's like funny, and no, we're friends, and it's great.
And the collaboration, I think, of the three of us coming up with things that aren't in the script on the day was really successful.
Like, it feels very comfortable. A lot of times when you work on a movie, you're working with somebody that you've never met, and you don't know a shorthand, you don't know comedically where they're at. We knew how to throw each other things or like confuse each other with lines or jokes or things, like trying to one up each other, trying to like make the other person laugh, I think is when you get really good stuff.
There's an example of, I would say, the John Travolta joke that's in there. We ran out of time. There was going to be a gore gag in there, but then all we had was a chant. And I'm like, guys, all we have is a chant. Can we make it funny? And Carlos is like, I got something. He comes in, does the John Travolta line that cracked me up, and it made the movie.
But also the sort of 80s aesthetic to me is very striking in the short, and that may be my second favorite part of the whole thing, is just the whole look and feel of it.
I also think the gore is really fun and really unique to Chris's movies. Like, he takes it a step further and commits to the goriness and the practical effects of it, and it gives it this nice throwback feel, which I think is unique.
Fascinating. Well, I'd say it's time to dive into a teaser, wouldn't you?
Tacos?
Didn't work.
Who's that?
We must have messed up the spell.
Well, it's not a demon.
It's a demon.
Okay, I gotta admit, I'm hooked. Let's get into the fun facts.
Fun fact: the skull. We did this green skull that for Carlos when his face gets punched in. And on the last take, we remembered we had lasagna for lunch that day, so we filled the skull with lasagna. And when he punches it and reveals the lasagna, that's what's in the movie.
Well, fun fact: the earring I wore in the film, I became enamored with. I had a moment where I thought I could maybe pull that off, like in real life, and I was obsessed with it. And then I asked my wife, and she was like, "No, don't do that."
Fun fact: the hand that comes out of the ground of the demon is actually the wardrobe person, Emily. We didn't want all the blood from the concrete to drip down on the demon, so she volunteered.
Fun fact, I got a haircut on the day of the shoot, and it took a long time to give me the haircut and a lot of discussion over what the haircut would entail. It was basically a Skrillex haircut where one side was shaved really short and then kind of put up really high, a lot of volume to it. And then in the very first scene where you see me on camera, I get blood on my hair and you never got to see the haircut. And so I just had this really idiotic looking haircut for no reason other than Chris's enjoyment.
Fun fact: because of timing and budget, we designed the demon mask on a smaller mold that the effects guy already had. And then we cast John as the demon and his head was much bigger. So it was very tight on him.
I have to say, horror comedy is a very popular but tough mix. Wherein would you say lies the art of walking that thin line between the two?
I think horror and comedy are the two genres that have some sort of reaction to in an audience or to a person that you can feel and hear. Like if you're scared, you scream, you get tense. If you laugh out loud from something's funny, a lot of times they combine in horror films. If in the movie you use the gore as the punchline, you have some sort of setup, and then you hit it with the gore. That's the way where we've been able to use the practical effects like over the top to get the most laughs. Is you still have to have the setup of a joke, like what they were talking about with the names. Okay, they're guessing names, and then a big swipe to the arm and blood shoots out everywhere. And also, I'm like heavily influenced by all the horror films of the 80s and the comedy movies of the 80s, specifically ones that have like best friends.
I think a lot of the comedy comes in just like how human Chris's characters are. Carlos and Kirk in We Summon the Demon are idiots, and but I don't know, they feel very human, and I remember we built a bit of backstory to them, that they were like sort of in a smaller town when we were like running for our lives from this demon, and we stopped to hide, and then Kirk mocks me, like he repeats what I say as if he's a toddler, or as a dumb high school best friend might do. I don't know. I think you can milk a lot of comedy out of that.
I think too, just the way that you guys all react to the situations. Everybody kind of acts like it's a drama, but the situations are so ridiculous, and you're just kind of in your like normal mode, like, oh, you're just talking to my grandma's coming to visit or something, but really there's a demon coming after you.
Well, it's been absolutely charming having you guys over, and do stop by again soon. And while you're at it, please say hi to your demon friend from me.
Oh yeah, oh John Travolta, oh yeah, John Travolta, John Travolta.
Well, that's all we have time for on today's episode of the GRIMM Exchange.
Remember to support the horror industry by watching films, playing games, and reading books.
Speaking of films, don't forget to check out the rest of our channel, Grimfest TV, to catch the marvelously morbid makings of some amazing independent filmmakers.
And finally, special thanks to our sponsors, Fire and Brimstone. We'll see you next time on
The GRIMM Exchange.
If I can